Hello, my name is Professor Larry Flick, and I'll be bringing you a learning nugget or quick flick on the basics of supply and demand. Understanding supply and demand is critical to understanding business and economics. Here we will focus on giving you the basic understanding. Let's start with the demand curve. The demand curve represents the quantity of a product that buyers are willing to purchase at each of various prices. For example, let's start at a price of $7 and move to the right to the demand curve and drop down to see a quantity of about 1.3 units. So at $7 you might expect to sell 1.3 units. Now, let's say the price drops to $5. Doing the same thing, we can see that the quantity would be about 1.6 units. Now, let's say the price drops again to $3, and we can see that the quantity would be approximately 2.4 units. Therefore, we can say that as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up, an inverse relationship. Basically, the lower the price, the more you sell. Now, let's take a look at the supply curve, where the supply of a particular product is the quantity of the product that producers are willing to sell at each of various prices. For example, let's start at a price of $3 and move to the right to the supply curve and then down to discover that at that price, producers would be willing to supply a quantity of approximately 1.6 units. Now, if the price goes up from 3 to 5, producers would be willing to supply approximately 2.4 units, and if the price goes up to $8, producers would be willing to supply 3 units. So in conclusion, the higher the price a producer can get, the more they are willing to supply. Generally, the higher the price, the bigger the margins, the more the profit. Now let's superimpose the demand curve on the supply curve. In summary, the demand curve is based on what customers are willing to buy, and the supply curve is based on what suppliers are willing to produce. Note that there is an intersection of the two where a state of equilibrium exists, where supply equals demand. Why is it important to discover the equilibrium? Because if you know the equilibrium point, you know the price where demand equals supply. And if that price allows you an acceptable margin, you would probably choose to produce the product. If not, you probably would not produce it. Another conclusion is that when supply is plentiful, it's a buyer's market, and when supply is scarce, it's a seller's market. When it's a buyer's market, there is downward pressure on prices, and when it's a seller's market, there is an upward pressure on prices. Think about the implications. Of course, there is always more, but you now know the basics. If you want to go a little further, you might consider the question, why is demand and supply represented by curves instead of straight lines?